I have always preferred numbers to people. Numbers make sense. They follow rules. If you add 2 and 2, you always get 4. You never get a sudden betrayal, you never get a condescending look, and you certainly never get told that you are a walking disappointment. People, on the other hand, are a completely different equation. Specifically, my family. My name is Maya. I am 34 years old, a single mother, and I run a small, independent accounting firm in the quiet suburbs of Charleston, South Carolina. My entire world revolves around my 10-year-old son, Finn. Finn is the kind of kid who picks up worms from the sidewalk after it rains so they do not get stepped on. He has messy brown hair, a gap-toothed smile, and a heart so big I sometimes worry the world will crush it. He is my reason for breathing, my anchor, and my only true family. To understand how things got so bad at my sister's wedding, you have to understand the decade of quiet humiliation that led up to it. 11 years ago, my life fell apart in spectacular fashion. My father, the only person in my family who ever truly saw me, was diagnosed with aggressive liver cancer. We spent months living out of the cold, sterile waiting rooms of Charleston General Hospital. Right around the time his condition became terminal, I found out I was pregnant. I was 23, terrified, and totally alone. The guy I had been seeing bolted the second he saw the positive test. When my father passed away, my mother, Margaret, did not seek comfort in her daughters. Instead, she looked at my growing belly and decided that I had brought unforgivable shame upon her during her time of mourning. In her eyes, I was not a grieving daughter or a terrified mother-to-be, I was a scandalous stain on the family's perfect image. She diverted all her love, all her pride, and all her resources to my younger sister, Cassandra. Cassandra was the golden child. For years younger than me, she was everything my mother wanted, polished, superficial, and fiercely protective of her own image. While I spent my 20s sleep-deprived, balancing community college classes with waitressing to put food on the table for Finn, Cassandra was being handed a fully paid university degree and a shiny new car. I built my accounting firm from absolutely nothing. Late nights, endless cups of cheap coffee, taking on any client who would give me a chance. I clawed my way to stability so Finn would never have to know the feeling of an empty fridge. But no matter how successful I became, to Margaret and Cassandra, I was always just Maya the mistake. I was the cautionary tale they brought up at neighborhood barbecues. They treated me less like a family member and more like a servant they were forced to acknowledge on holidays. I accepted it. I swallowed the pride, the insults, and the cold shoulders. Why? Because I grew up with a big family, and the thought of Finn growing up completely isolated terrified me. I wanted him to have a grandmother, even a distant one. I wanted him to have an aunt. I thought if I just stayed quiet, worked hard, and made myself useful, they would eventually love us. I was incredibly naive. The beginning of the end started with a mandatory summons. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone rang. Seeing my mother's caller ID always made my stomach drop. Margaret did not call to chat, she called to issue directives. She told me I was expected at her house for dinner on Sunday at 6 o'clock sharp. When I asked what the occasion was, she just said Cassandra had important news, and hung up. Sunday dinner at Margaret's house was a stiff, uncomfortable affair. Finn sat quietly next to me, eating his peas and trying not to make a sound, because Margaret hated what she called rowdy children. Cassandra walked into the dining room an hour late, looking like she had just stepped out of a magazine. She held out her left hand, a massive diamond catching the light of the chandelier. She announced she was engaged. Her fiancé was a man named Nathaniel. According to Cassandra, he was 36, incredibly wealthy, owned a chain of high-end sporting goods stores across the East Coast, and came from a very respectable family. Margaret practically wept with joy, praising Cassandra for securing such a perfect future. I offered my genuine congratulations. I was happy for her. But the celebration lasted about 5 minutes before Cassandra slid a massive, thick binder across the dining table toward me. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. She told me she was planning the wedding of the century, and she needed an accountant to manage the budget, track the vendor deposits, and handle all the tax implications for the venue contracts. I asked what her budget for an accountant was. Cassandra laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. She said I was her sister, and family helps family. It was an expectation, not a request. Before I could even process the demand for hundreds of hours of free labor, Margaret chimed in. She said it was the least I could do, considering how much embarrassment I had caused the family over the years. She added that since I was so good with crafts, I would also be in charge of making the 300 handwritten wedding invitations and all the floral centerpieces to save them money. I looked at Finn, who was watching me with wide, worried eyes. I wanted to stand up, grab my purse, and walk out. But Margaret gave me that look, the look that said if I refused, we would be cut off completely. No Christmas dinners, no birthday cards for Finn, nothing. I took a deep breath, pulled the heavy binder toward me, and said I would do it. For the next 3 weeks, my life was a living nightmare. I was running a business during the day, managing my paying clients who actually respected my time. But the second I got home and put Finn to bed, I had to open Cassandra's binder. I became her unpaid, invisible workhorse. I would sit at my kitchen table until 3 o'clock in the morning, my eyes burning from the glow of the laptop. I was tracking tens of thousands of dollars in floral deposits, catering fees, and venue rentals. Every morning, Cassandra would text me a new list of demands. Sometimes she wanted me to call a vendor and ruthlessly negotiate a lower price because she did not want to look cheap, but she wanted me to do the dirty work. One night, the exhaustion finally caught up with me. I was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by hundreds of pieces of expensive parchment paper, trying to handwrite invitations in a perfect cursive font because Cassandra refused to pay a professional calligrapher. My hand was cramped, and I had a terrible migraine. Finn came out of his bedroom holding his stuffed bear. He rubbed his eyes and asked me why I was always working in the dark. I tried to smile and told him Aunt Cassie was getting married, and we were helping her make it beautiful. Finn looked at the messy piles of paper, then looked at me, and said, "But Aunt Cassie never says thank you. She only yells at you." Out of the mouths of babes. I pulled him into a hug, feeling a hot tear slide down my cheek. I told him that sometimes, we do hard things for family, even when they forget their manners. But in the quiet of that night, I hated myself. I was teaching my son that it was okay to be a doormat. I was letting my family exploit my skills and steal my sleep, just to maintain a fragile, fake peace. I rationalized it by telling myself it was only for a few months. Once the wedding was over, things would go back to normal. I would retreat to my safe, quiet life, and Cassandra would have her perfect husband. I had no idea that her perfect husband was carrying a secret from my past. Cassandra's engagement party was held at a prestigious country club overlooking the water. I was not invited as a guest. I was told to arrive 3 hours early to coordinate with the catering staff, arrange the seating charts, and manage the coat check. I wore a plain black dress, comfortable shoes, and stayed completely out of the way. Finn sat in a small chair near the coat room, quietly reading a book about dinosaurs. About an hour into the party, Nathaniel, the groom-to-be, finally arrived. He was tall, with dark hair and a quiet, observant demeanor that felt completely out of place next to Cassandra's loud, attention-seeking energy. Margaret immediately dragged him over to the coat check area to drop off his jacket. She introduced me with a dismissive wave of her hand, saying, "And this is Maya. She is helping out with the coats. She is the sister who made all those unfortunate mistakes we told you about." I kept my eyes down, taking his jacket and muttering a polite hello. But when I glanced up, Nathaniel was completely frozen. He was staring at me. His expression shifted from polite boredom to absolute, undeniable shock. He opened his mouth to speak, but Cassandra swooped in, grabbing his arm and pulling him away to meet a local politician. I brushed off the strange interaction, assuming he was just surprised to meet the infamous black sheep. An hour later, I was sorting through a mess of umbrellas when I heard a deep, calm voice. I peeked around the corner and saw Nathaniel crouching down next to Finn. Nathaniel was pointing at the book, asking Finn serious questions about the Cretaceous period. Finn was glowing, happily explaining the difference between carnivores and herbivores. It was a small, tender moment. But it was shattered when Cassandra marched over, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. She grabbed Nathaniel's shoulder, shooting a glaring look at Finn. She told Nathaniel not to waste his time with that kid, claiming Finn was a distraction and that they had important people to impress. Nathaniel's smile vanished. He stood up slowly, gave Finn a gentle pat on the shoulder, and followed Cassandra. But before he turned the corner, he looked back at me. There was something heavy in his eyes. A memory I couldn't quite place. A month later, Margaret demanded I take an unpaid day off work to drive them to Atlanta for wedding dress shopping. Cassandra refused to buy a dress locally, she needed an exclusive designer. The drive took hours, and I was treated like a chauffeur. When we arrived at the luxury bridal boutique, I was relegated to a small corner chair, tasked with holding everyone's heavy winter coats and purses. Cassandra paraded out in gown after gown, each one costing upwards of $10,000. Margaret clapped and wiped away fake tears. During one of the fittings, Cassandra stepped onto the pedestal in a stunning lace gown. Margaret sighed dramatically and said, "Oh, Cassie, you saved yourself for the right man. You did everything perfectly. Not like Maya. Ruined at 23. The words hung in the quiet boutique. The sales assistants awkwardly looked away. I stared at the carpet, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. I told myself to breathe. Do it for Finn. Then came the discussion of bridesmaid dresses. Cassandra turned to me with a cold, calculated smile. She told me I would be in the wedding party, but I was strictly forbidden from wearing the blush pink gowns the other girls were wearing. She had selected a drab, heavy, muddy brown dress for me. She said it was because my body type wasn't flattering enough for pink, but I knew the truth. She wanted me to look terrible so I wouldn't ruin her aesthetic. And then she dropped the real bomb. She casually mentioned that Finn would not be allowed in any of the professional family photographs. She said children his age were unpredictable, and she didn't want the reminder of my mistake ruining her expensive photo album. I felt a hot wave of pure rage wash over me. I stood up, ready to finally scream, ready to tear the expensive veil off her head. But before I could speak, Margaret stepped between us, her eyes narrowing into slits, warning me not to ruin her perfect day. I backed down. I hated myself for it, but I backed down. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon. Finn was at school, and I was alone in my accounting office, drowning in tax returns. The bell above the door jingled. I assumed it was the mailman, but when I looked up, Nathaniel was standing in the doorway. He was wearing a tailored suit, holding a wet umbrella, and looking incredibly nervous. I was immediately on guard. I asked him if Cassandra had sent him to demand more spreadsheets. He shook his head, closed the door, and flipped the lock. He walked over to my desk and sat down in the client chair. He looked at me intently, his eyes scanning my face as if searching for a ghost. Then he spoke. His voice was low and trembling. Charleston General Hospital. The ICU waiting room. 11 years ago. My breath caught in my throat. My hands froze over my keyboard. You brought me terrible black coffee from the vending machine, he continued, leaning forward. You sat with me for 4 nights straight. You were pregnant. You were crying about your dad. And I was waiting for my little sister, Penelope, to die. The memories hit me like a freight train. 11 years ago. The tall, exhausted young man with dark circles under his eyes. Penelope. The sweet, bright 16-year-old girl who lost her battle with leukemia on a rainy Tuesday morning. I had held his hand while he sobbed in the hallway because his parents couldn't bear to be there. We had shared our deepest, darkest grief in the sterile glow of fluorescent hospital lights. And then, we parted ways, 2 strangers bound by tragedy. I covered my mouth with both hands, the tears springing to my eyes instantly. "Nathaniel," I whispered. He nodded, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. He told me he never forgot the girl who showed him kindness when he was completely broken. He said when he saw me at the engagement party, he couldn't believe it. But when he heard Margaret and Cassandra talk about me, calling me a mistake, treating me like dirt, it made him sick to his stomach. I begged him not to tell Cassandra. I was terrified. If Cassandra knew I had a profound, emotional connection with her perfect fiancé long before she met him, she would destroy me out of pure, venomous jealousy. Nathaniel agreed to keep the secret. But before he left my office, he looked at me and said, "Maya, you are the strongest person I know. Why are you letting them break you?" I didn't have an answer. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below with the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps this video reach a wider audience. Thank you so much for your support. Let's get back to the story. 2 weeks after my secret conversation with Nathaniel, the wedding chaos reached a fever pitch. Cassandra decided that the original cake designer wasn't prestigious enough and demanded a last-minute tasting at a boutique bakery downtown. Since it was a Saturday and my babysitter had cancelled, I had to bring Finn along. I told him to be on his best behavior, and he promised he would. He even wore his little button-down shirt. We arrived at the bakery, a place filled with the smell of sugar and expensive vanilla. Cassandra and Margaret were already there, looking impatient. Nathaniel arrived a few minutes later, looking tired. As we sat at the tasting table, Cassandra spent the first 20 minutes complaining about the humidity and how it might ruin her hair on the big day. She completely ignored the 3 different types of cake the baker had prepared. Finn was sitting quietly next to me, coloring in a small notebook I'd brought. At one point, he reached for a napkin to wipe a small smudge of ink off his finger. His elbow accidentally brushed a silver spoon, and it clattered onto the marble floor. The sound wasn't even that loud, but Cassandra jumped as if a bomb had gone off. She turned on Finn with a look of pure venom. She told him he was a clumsy, uncoordinated burden and that this was exactly why she didn't want undisciplined children at her high-end events. Margaret chimed in, telling me I should have left him in the car if I couldn't control him. I felt my face get hot with shame and anger. I started to apologize, but Nathaniel spoke up before I could get a word out. He reached down, picked up the spoon, and handed it back to the baker with a polite smile. Then he looked directly at Cassandra. His voice was calm, but there was a new, sharp edge to it. He told her that Finn had been sitting more quietly than most adults he knew and that accidents happen. He then spent the rest of the tasting asking Finn which cake flavor he liked best. Cassandra was fuming, her face turning a blotchy red, but she didn't dare argue with Nathaniel in front of the bakery staff. I realized then that Nathaniel wasn't just observing anymore. He was starting to push back. It was 10 days before the wedding. My house looked like a disaster zone. There were boxes of silk flowers, rolls of ribbon, and stacks of place cards covering every available surface. I was sitting on the floor of my living room at 2 o'clock in the morning, trying to assemble 200 individual wedding favors. Each one had to be tied with a perfect, double-looped bow. My fingers were raw, and my back felt like it was being poked with hot needles. I had spent the day dealing with a difficult tax audit for a client, then 3 hours on the phone with the caterer because Cassandra had changed her mind about the fish entree for the 5th time. I was beyond exhausted. I was hollow. As I struggled with a particularly stubborn piece of ribbon, I felt a sob catch in my throat. I tried to swallow it, but then another one followed, and soon I was crying silently, the tears blurring my vision. I didn't hear the door open, but suddenly, I felt a small hand on my shoulder. It was Finn. He was standing there in his dinosaur pajamas, looking at me with so much sadness in his little eyes. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat down on the floor next to me and started trying to help me tie the bows. After a few minutes, he whispered, "Mom, does Aunt Cassie hate me? Is it my fault you're always crying?" Those words broke something inside of me. I pulled him into my lap and held him so tight, sobbing into his hair. I realized that by trying to keep the peace and give him a family, I was actually showing him that it was okay for people to treat us like we were worthless. I was teaching him that our feelings didn't matter as long as Cassandra was happy. I promised him right then and there, in the middle of all that white lace and silver ribbon, that this was the last time. I told him that after the wedding, we were going to be done. We were going to be free. I didn't care about Margaret's threats anymore. My son's heart was worth more than a seat at a toxic dinner table. The night before the wedding, the rehearsal dinner was held at a 5-star seafood restaurant. It was an incredibly formal affair. I had spent the afternoon coordinating the floral deliveries and making sure the seating cards were perfect. When Finn and I arrived, Margaret met us at the door. She didn't even say hello. She just pointed toward the back of the room, near the swinging doors that led to the kitchen. She had placed us at a tiny, cramped table that was clearly meant for the extra waitstaff or storage. It was far away from the main long table where the wedding party and the important guests were sitting. It was a blatant, public insult. I saw a few of Cassandra's friends whispering and smirking as we walked to our lonely corner. We sat there for 20 minutes, ignored by the servers, while the main table laughed and drank expensive champagne. But then, the front doors opened and Nathaniel walked in. He scanned the room, ignoring Cassandra who was waving him over to the seat next to her. His eyes landed on us, tucked away by the kitchen. He didn't say a word to the rest of the room. He walked straight over to our tiny table, pulled out a chair, and sat down between Finn and me. He asked the nearest waiter to bring 2 more chairs to the head table immediately. Cassandra stood up, her voice high and panicked. She tried to say that the seating chart was already set and that there wasn't enough room. Nathaniel looked at her, his expression cold and unyielding. He said that if there wasn't room for his guests of honor, then there wasn't room for the groom either. The entire restaurant went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Margaret looked like she was about to have a heart attack. After a very tense minute of shuffling, the staff moved us to the head table. Nathaniel sat between me and Finn the entire night, ignoring Cassandra's pouting and Margaret's icy glares. He leaned over and whispered to me, "Just one more day, Maya. Hold on." The morning of the wedding was a blur of high-stress labor. I was up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I had to deliver the centerpieces to the venue, fix a crisis with the linens, and help Cassandra into her dress because she had fired her stylist in a fit of rage. She spent the entire morning screaming at everyone. I was exhausted, my feet were swollen, and I was wearing that hideous, muddy brown dress she had picked out for me. It looked even worse in the harsh light of the bridal suite. The ceremony itself was held in a massive, ornate ballroom filled with white roses and hundreds of guests in tuxedos and evening gowns. I sat in the very last row of the church with Finn. I wasn't even allowed to sit with the family. I watched as Cassandra walked down the aisle, looking like a dream in her $10,000 dress, acting like the perfect, blushing bride. Nathaniel stood at the altar, looking stiff and uncomfortable. When it came time for the vows, his I do sounded heavy, almost like a sigh. He didn't look at Cassandra, his eyes kept drifting to the back of the room, finding me and Finn. I felt a strange sense of dread and anticipation. I knew something was coming. I could feel the electricity in the air. The reception was a display of obscene wealth. There was an open bar, a 5-course meal, and a 10-piece orchestra. Finn and I sat at a table in the far corner, hidden behind a large floral pillar. We ate our dinner quietly, watching the spectacle from the shadows. Cassandra was in her element, floating around the room, soaking up the praise and the attention. About 2 hours into the party, after the champagne had been flowing freely, Cassandra decided it was time for the speeches. She took the microphone from the best man, looking slightly flushed from the alcohol. She started with the usual fake platitudes, thanking her mother and her new husband. But then, her tone changed. She looked across the room, searching for me. She found me behind the pillar and pointed the microphone toward our table. And finally, she said, her voice dripping with a cruel, mocking sweetness, I want to thank my sister, Maya. She did so much of the heavy lifting for this wedding. Honestly, it's good that she has so much free time, since nobody really wants a single mom with all that baggage. Look at her over there. A walking cautionary tale for all of you. The room went quiet, a few people let out uncomfortable chuckles. Cassandra wasn't done. She looked at Finn, who was shrinking into his seat. To be honest, she continued, your kid is just a mistake that ruined your life, but hey, thanks for setting the bar so low for me so I could look even better today. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart stopped. I looked at Finn, and his little lip was trembling. He looked like he wanted to disappear. The humiliation was absolute. It was public, it was cruel, and it was the final straw. Before I could even stand up to grab Finn and run, Nathaniel was already moving. He stood up from his seat at the head table, his face a mask of cold, concentrated fury. He walked over to Cassandra and firmly took the microphone out of her hand. She smiled at him, probably expecting him to tell a joke to lighten the mood. He didn't smile back. He turned to face the entire room, his voice booming through the speakers. A mistake? He asked, his eyes burning. You just called that boy a mistake? He looked at the crowd, then back at me. 11 years ago, I was a broken man sitting in a hospital hallway. My little sister, Penelope, was dying of cancer. My own parents couldn't handle the pain, so they left me there alone. But this woman over there, Maya, who was pregnant and grieving her own father, stayed with me. She brought me coffee. She held my hand while I cried. She gave me the strength to say goodbye to my sister. She was a stranger who showed me more grace and humanity than I have seen in this entire room tonight. The silence was deafening. Cassandra's jaw dropped. Margaret looked like she was choking. Nathaniel turned to Cassandra, his voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that was still caught by the mic. I spent months looking for that girl, but I never found her until I met you. I thought you were different. I thought you were kind. But after watching you treat your own sister like a servant and your nephew like a mistake, I realized I was wrong. I'm not marrying a woman who has no soul. He took the ring off his finger and set it down on the table. He looked at her one last time and said, we are done. The sound of the microphone hitting the floor, that heavy, echoing thud, was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. Nathaniel walked off the stage, through the crowd of stunned socialites, and came straight to our table. He picked up Finn, took my hand, and led us out of the ballroom without looking back. The walk to the parking lot felt like a dream. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I could actually draw a full breath. We got into Nathaniel's car, and he drove away from the resort at a steady, calm pace. Inside the car, it was quiet. Finn was hugging Nathaniel's arm from the back seat. My phone, which was sitting in my lap, suddenly began to vibrate. It was a call from Margaret. Then a text from Cassandra, followed by 50 more. The screen was flashing with insults, threats, and hysterical demands to come back and fix the mess we had made. Nathaniel glanced at the phone. He reached over, picked it up, and gently switched it to Do Not Disturb mode. Then he turned it face down on the center console. Not tonight, he said softly. Tonight, we just breathe. We drove for about 30 minutes until we found a small, 24-hour diner on the edge of town. It was the complete opposite of the wedding, bright yellow booths, the smell of grease, and neon signs. We sat there in our formal clothes, looking completely ridiculous, and ordered the biggest stack of pancakes on the menu. We laughed until we cried. The crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest for a decade was gone. I looked at Nathaniel, and I didn't see a wealthy businessman or a groom. I saw the boy from the hospital. My friend. My hero. A year has passed since that night. The fallout was massive, of course. Cassandra's wedding that wasn't became the biggest scandal in Charleston social history. She and Margaret tried to sue Nathaniel for the wedding costs, But they failed miserably since he had already paid for almost everything anyway. I haven't spoken to either of them since that night. I blocked their numbers, their social media, and I even moved my office to a better part of town. My accounting firm is doing better than ever. I finally have clients who value my work and pay me what I'm worth. But more importantly, I have a home that is filled with peace. Nathaniel and I took things very slow. We spent the first 6 months just being friends, letting Finn get used to having him around. But eventually, love found its way back to us. He is the most incredible father figure Finn could have ever asked for. Every few months, I check my blocked messages folder. There are still voicemails from my mother, usually complaining about how lonely she is or how Cassandra's life is in shambles after her second failed engagement. My friends tell me I should at least hear them out for closure, or that family is family. But I look at Finn, who is happy, confident, and loved, and I know I made the right choice. I finally have a family that doesn't make me feel like a burden. But sometimes, late at night, I see those missed calls from unknown numbers, and I wonder. My friends say I'm being too harsh. So, tell me. Am I the jerk for refusing to ever speak to my mother and sister again, even if they want to apologize? Thank you so much for watching and listening to my story. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.